So, at long last, we end up at this point. The end. It's just a fact, man. Silent Hill 2 is such an incredible and long-lasting game that no remake, Netflix original series, or Hackney film can convey. There's a charm to this game and it sticks with you forever once you play it. You never forget it, and after you play it, it really does kind of sour your taste in other horror games, I feel, because it sets so many standards for not only the Silent Hill games, but horror as in, like, the whole genre. Yeah, we all know that Silent Hill is heavily inspired by other things like Jacob's Ladder, Stephen King, various surreal artists, but it's still 100% pure to its core and a unique experience as a piece of media. So many games take cues from this one, whether it be things like the Condemned series, or the Suffering titles, or even indie projects, commercial or not. Layers of Fear tends to come up quite a bit, but I'm a fucking old person and it's not from 1994 to 2012, so it's non-existent to me. However, I can pinpoint examples I have played, like Cry of Fear and Afraid of Monsters, which borrow tropes like monsters based on personality traits and phobias, otherworldly imagery, world shifting, and puzzles sewn from cryptic clues and environmental details. The use of Silent Hill 2 and 3's aesthetic of rust, blood, and decay are heavily present in the environments of these two Half-Life mods, as well as the use of chiaroscuro art techniques on the inventory and puzzle items in Cry of Fear. That's right, I fucking learned you some art. Seth was an art student. He knows the art. Hell, one of my favorite mods of all time for Doom, called Unloved, was my first exposure not only to the replication of Silent Hill 2's art style and presentation, but it was also my first exposure to the soundtrack of Silent Hill 2. Like, holy shit, I have to gush here for a minute because I've obviously been holding this back the entire analysis. Silent Hill 2's soundtrack is so fucking good. It's one of the greatest OSTs for anything, period, and I don't just say that because I've sucked this game off for so long. No, as a musician myself, it's truly masterful. The usage of acoustic guitar and letters that uses the same motifs and melodies as Promise, it fucking sends chills in me, man, and I love the wah-filled electric guitar notes really driving home in the feeling of inner reflection. The fact that Promise and Overdose Delusion share so much in common structurally but have wildly different guitar tones is just something I love, too. Overdose Delusion uses tremolo-like broken chords for the lead guitar, and has some fucking chunky and grungy power chords during the breakdown. Promise uses a much more alternative and dissonant lead guitar that crescendos into a bluesy-inspired solo. Just fuck! The ethereal and very iconic synth samples on tracks like Terror in the Depths of the Fog coincide so well with the other synth-infused tracks like White Noise, Blank Fairy, and Heaven's Night. Just fuck, these tracks are so amazing and mesmerizing, and it really adds to the charm of everything feeling dreamlike and lucid. I love the drum grooves in Heaven's Night, and especially in tracks like True. There's this off-tempo and sexy rhythm to tracks like Null Moon, with a subdued bass and drum beat, and Alone in the Town really shows off the power and versatility of proper hi-hat play. Like, god damn, these tracks are so juicy! I'm also a bassist first, yeah, but I'm also an ambient musician second, and if it isn't clear at this point for however long this series has been going on, I was heavily inspired by artists like Akira Yamaoka, Soichi Terada, Kelly Bailey, and Mark Morgan. Let's focus down Akira here though, because his usage of ambient sound is so damn gorgeous that I feel Silent Hill 2 wouldn't even be half the game it is without his soundscapes that add so much depth and immersion to the experience. Every track is used at the right time, for the right moods, and the right length of time as well, and it makes the game so much more memorable and emotional, and really complements the world design as well. Like, think about how every time Eddie is on screen, the music is ominous and tense. Every time Angela is on screen, the music consists of mainly piano and strings, with some somber melodies thrown in here and there. Lara's music tracks are gentle and more upbeat, matching her childlike innocence and wonder. James's tracks consist of primarily dissonant and cold synth soundscapes. Maria's themes invoke sexual undertones, relying on compressed or filtered bass and drum grooves and playful piano skills. Like, can you see why this soundtrack is so damn good? Anyways, yeah, Silent Hill 2 is just, it's so influential to horror and such an innovator in its own series. It's kind of like the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre film. Maybe I'm cheating a little bit here and have some bias since it's like, you know, my second favorite movie of all time. But seriously, think about it, and don't worry, if you've never seen the film, don't feel bad. Much, okay? You should. But, okay. So the original TCM was a film that came out at a time when the horror genre was relying on sex, gore, and jump scares. Most films of this era I can't even watch, not because I'm squeamish, but it's just gonna end up being a shit show of weird 70s schlock filled to the brim with as much uncomfortable shit as possible, just for the sake of it. Along comes a film with a budget as low as it could possibly get, with a unique premise. It's a horror film, yeah, but it's more psychological, right? We don't even see Leatherface until damn near 30 minutes or so into the film, and when he shows up, there's no scary music, there's no screaming, and there's no crazy imagery. It's just subtle and uncomfortable, and that music sting after he slams that door is so much more impactful to me than his overall presence, and it was clearly a deliberate editing choice. Most killers or monsters at this time in film were built up too dramatically, and with some subtlety, but their big reveal always feels frail to me since the tension and apprehension dissipates for the rest of the film afterwards. Consider the fact the movie also bills itself as a pseudo-urban legend with that badass narration at the start, which adds to the sense of reality and non-reality, similar to the Blair Witch Project, another favorite film of mine. Everything about this movie is just, it's nerve-wracking more than gut-wrenching, and it set up a lot of modern tropes. The crazy family unit, backwood cannibals or lunatics, wearing a mask of human skin, I mean, yeah, Ed Gein did it before it was cool, I know. The final survivor being a normal woman, and the use of non-gory gore, to name a few examples from the film. TCM was just a fucking juggernaut among the horror crowd, and I'm not a huge horror fan, because, well, this film spoiled it for me. I could talk for hours about just TCM and how great it is, but you see where I'm gonna go with this metaphor now? Every film after the original TCM was just, well, they're kinda shithouse if we're being real here. 2 is tonally goofy and batshit. 3 is just, well, it's something. 4 is, 5 is 2000's Edge with Arlie Ermey going ballistic, so yeah, just another day for the life of him. You see pretty clearly that every TCM after the first one was just a gradual decline, and the series never caught on in the way other horror mascots would, like Jason, Freddy, or George W. Bush Jr. did.
Now watch this drive.
They lost sight of what made the original special, or milked the tropes too hard, like trying to humanize the man with another man's face on his own, or the low-angle ash shot of the Sawyer house, the dinner scene, the final girl, you get the idea. Silent Hill as a franchise has never fully been able to stretch out of 2's shadow because, well, it's a fucking huge shadow, man. Think of all the things that Silent Hill 2 did for horror games at the time. A very clear lack of jump scares, an interesting and dark twist to the character you were playing, monsters based on internal strife, a monster that stalked and followed the main character covered in a spooky mask, multiple endings based on player choices throughout the entire game that weren't signposted. Every Silent Hill game after 2 had to incorporate these mechanics in some way or another to stay relevant, and it's not inherently a bad thing. I mean, why change what isn't broken, right? The problem is that Silent Hill as a franchise really couldn't commit much further past 3 and 4, and I know the Western games get a bad rep, but it's kinda justified, honestly. Silent Hill 3 is a good sequel to Silent Hill 1, and improves and builds off tropes and mechanics of 2. The Room, I've not played without friends around, but I do know of it, and yeah, it's unique, and it uses tropes and mechanics from 2 and 3, with a bit of ties to 2 and 3 stories. Once you get to games like Origins, Homecoming, and Shattered Memories, there's not much more you can really do with the series, right? Why keep throwing nurses into the games? Oh, Silent Hill 1 and 3 had them. Why keep making replicas of Pyramid Head or monsters similar in design? Oh yeah, Silent Hill 2 did it. Why have main characters that all have some hidden dark past? Oh yeah, Silent Hill 2 did it. Obviously, I've only played the first 3 games, so I don't feel qualified to be the judge of all the series, but as a creative person, I know when something is running on E. Shit, I would have been perfectly content having only 3 Silent Hill games, and that was it. It's like for me as a big Mortal Kombat fan, I consider everything past Armageddon to basically be MCU levels of fucking awful in terms of story and handling of the franchise. The last good MK game was basically X, and it's just because the fighting engine was solid and the story was semi-competent. 11 just jacked off for modern brain-dead Tumblr dwellers and opened its legs to leeches who just absorb pop culture and can't actually play games for shit. That's right, I went there. Sue me, asshole. Keep trying to say Scorpion's name like he's your best friend and keep trying to defend Ronda Rousey's abortive performance. Doesn't mean shit to someone who's actually, played the game and not just regurgitated shit off of a wiki to look cool. Where was I? Oh yeah, Silent Hill. Silent Hill capped at 2. And to me, that's fine. I don't want mediocrity. If I wanted it, I'd go and play a Resident Evil title and pretend the series was still good after 4. SH2 set such a high bar, and it's why it's still talked about almost 2 decades after its release, and why it's used in so many discussions about horror games and horror as a genre. It's like when you were in school and you had to read these things like Frankenstein, Catcher in the Rye, or Lord of the Flies. Those novels may be ancient, but they hold up. I mean, shit, dude, I've read the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy twice, and the Odyssey goes harder than it has any right to. But things like classic literature set the bar for the creative world, and it's why it's studied as rigorously as it is. Those tropes and memes, yeah, I know the actual word's definition, let me flex for fuck's sake, are important because they laid the foundations of what works and what doesn't, at least for literature. I mean, Tolkien isn't studied because of the Peter Jackson films or because black metal bands would hijack names from the books. No, Tolkien was a masterful writer who revolutionized the fantasy genre and put a lot of passion and soul into his own original work. I have zero interest in anything post-mortem because so much of modern Tolkien-based works rely on selling to the fantasy hack-and-slash crowd, and that's cool and all, but why I like Tolkien's work is his integration of world-building, poetry, history, and the themes of anti-war, inner strength, and nature versus man. I love the Peter Jackson trilogy of films. It's one of the few film series that I've actually seen in theaters and own. I love it that much, but, and I'm gonna get a lot of shit for this, I love the Ralph Bakshi version even more. I can hear the mouth-breathing shut-in going, but Ralph Bakshi made racist films with sexist characters and loved to draw women with large breasts. Yeah, big fucking whoop, that was over 50 fucking years ago, who cares? The art is gorgeous for this film, and it has this dark fantasy vibe mixed with its own sort of thing, and that's what I picture in my mind when I'm reading the books. The characters speak damn near identical passages from the novels, and everything is played pretty straight-faced and slow-paced, like the novels. Shit, dude, laugh all you want, but the Rankin Bass Hobbit and Return of the King films are in the same vein. Not as mature and foreboding as Bakshi's work, but they engage more into the literary side that Tolkien had in mind, even using songs and poems ripped straight from the novels, and they just feel cozy to watch, Why would I want more when what I have is good enough, right? Maybe I'm just too jaded, but I wish people had this idea that something is just done, I don't want a Silent Hill 2 remake. I don't even know why anyone in the fucking first place wanted one. I don't know why people insist that there needs to be a new thing every single day, all the time, and if that new thing doesn't exist in that very moment, reboot it so it stays relevant. What's the point? I know it's money, I'm not that stupid, you smarmy jackass. I just wish people could just sort of accept that Silent Hill, as it is kind of dead. Yeah, I know. But Seth, there was this thing with Hideo Kojima. Well, guess what? 1, it didn't happen. 2, Kojima is a great developer, but his name doesn't always mean success. 3, it didn't happen. 4, it was just a hype product. 5, it didn't fucking happen. Make your peace with the fact that some things just didn't happen. It's like when people bring up Chris Farley voicing Shrek. His line takes weren't that good. Chris Farley is dead. Move on. It's fun to play pretend or what if, but there's a point in time where you have to accept things for what they are. Like the Star Wars fanfiction fuckfest that is the... God, I hate to use these words. sequel trilogy. I wish the Silent Hill franchise was as solid as the first 3 games, I really do, but 2 is just, it's as good as it gets. I've played it over a dozen times, and you know what? I'll likely play it a dozen more times and it'll never get old, because I'll find something interesting or cool I didn't notice before, or just enjoy the game for what it is. I have a lot of games I come back to out of this sense of comfort, whether it be for their story, their art, their music, gameplay, or a combination of all those things. Games like Doom, Crash 2, Daggerfall, Half-Life, or Dark Souls 1. If you notice something about some of those games, you'll also notice that it's either the first or second game in a series because, just like with Silent Hill, I don't want to wade through bullshit out of some sense of completion like a fucking Funko Pop display. No, I saved that for the Army Men series, you know me.
You know me. Like a Dungeon Dragon.
No, I think some experiences are so solid and memorable, with so much to talk about, that it's almost unfair that I can't enjoy later titles. I have zero interest in anything to do with 3D Metroid titles or games with the dreaded M word attached to them. Metroid is a 2D game for me, and my experience with it is that forever, unfortunately. Mortal Kombat is a series that shot itself in the foot and turned me away, so now I just enjoy homebrews like MKP for the dedication and love put into those projects. Doom seems to have evolved with the times pretty well and made its own mark, but I am more interested in coding and creating my own levels for classic Doom, and I love working with creative limitations. Silent Hill 2 is... I'd hesitate to say perfect, but it kind of is. It handles very real and taboo subjects very seriously, and is a great way of visualizing concepts and emotions that mere words can't describe. I've waxed him before, but Max Darrett, the absolute unit, he actually suggests an idea that video games like Silent Hill 2 should be used as educational learning tools for the future, and I totally agree. Yeah, I know, I can see you rolling your eyes at the idea, but what's the difference between reading something like Fahrenheit 451 for a dystopian book project, or listening to Mozart in a music class? Or watching Begotten for human anatomy courses? I wish heavy metal was dissected more as a music class because the sheer complexity of musical skill required to write songs like Lateralis by Tool, Fistful of Steel by Rage Against the Machine, or Miasma by Ghost. It's impressive, man, and it doesn't get talked about enough. I wish films like TCM, Eraserhead, or Inglourious Basterds were used in discussing how to create interesting camera angles, theming, or how to create tension in a film. I think games like Half-Life and Silent Hill 2 and Super Metroid are easily some of the most important games of all time, and their design is important to study because of how they affected the gaming industry as a whole. The problem with culture in my mind, and this is going to come off as a bit callous and edgy, but consider everything I've said in this entire retrospective. We can't just accept that we live in a gross, nasty world with nasty things. We can't accept that the macabre, dark, and disturbed reality we live in is real. And there are individuals among us, like me, who fully accept and embrace that reality. Things like Silent Hill 2 are painful, yes, but you know what? Pain and discomfort is a process of healing, and avoiding things simply because they're yucky or icky, it's weird to me. Obviously I'm not stupid. You don't show an 8-year-old Silent Hill 2 when they ask you what it's like to be depressed. That's a bad idea waiting to happen. You can use examples from Silent Hill 2 to describe depression, but at the same time, you should also not rely on just things like consumable media to solve and explain away very real issues. I don't believe in shit like showing a white supremacist Schindler's List or like American History X and expecting them to just drop all their preconceived hatred and fears. I don't think that works. It's like how I don't think that making everyone in marketing ads black somehow will just magically solve all racial tensions in America. It just doesn't work that way. There's only so much media can influence, and I pray it stays that way forever, because media should be interpreted and scrutinized, and your conclusions from it should be personal and impactful, and it's only stuff based on your own opinions. It's why I get so fucking disgusted and weirded out by binge culture or this idea that everything should be collected and consumed at a rapid-fire pace with little retention, with very stringent and narrow mindsets. The ultimate goal is... what? To spit out trite repeated memes and garbage that contributes nothing to art, academia, or culture, and just say go nowhere statements like, I liked it, or it just needs remade. It's like how I fucking hate people that use TLDR unironically or just absorb shit from wikis, because it just shows this overall decay in critical thinking skills as well as social skills, and leads to people falling into lazy and shitty habits. When people say shit like, daddy loglegs are the most poisonous spiders in the world, I'm gonna call you out because you're too stupid to know what the difference between poison and venom is, and you don't know a goddamn thing about spiders, period. When people say, yeah, PTSD sounds awful, but you weren't in like a war or something, I want to ask them if they genuinely think that only military service members are people that experience violent shock or trauma out of the billions of people on the planet. If I had one wish for the future, it would be for public education to understand and educate the youth of the future on the minds of the mentally ill and how we see the world. I wish that we as a species tried to help those in pain and not placate to their problems just out of some sense of, well, it's their choice, because clearly that hasn't helped us in the past few thousand years, now has it? You know what helped my life? Realizing that I was a selfish and self-destructive person and harming those around me because of my inability to want to help myself. I expected everyone to bow to me because I had it bad, and that's exactly the worst thing to possibly do. It took me nearly getting killed at 25 after a breakup by an oncoming drunk driver to realize that the last words I would have said to my best friend were, I don't fucking care anymore if I live or die. I'm better off dead because all I do is fuck things up for everyone. That would have been the last things they had heard me say if I had died, and they would have had to live with that forever. It took my boss and building manager sitting me down and telling me to take time off and to stop living in fear and paranoia to make me realize that I had lost sight of what made me happy. It took years of therapy and medication and thousands of hours of introspection and reality checking to get where I am today. And you know what? If I continued to do things my way, I'd be incomprehensible, I'd be totally vacant, I'd see the world in such an even more twisted way, and I'm sure I wouldn't have lived past 20. Games like Silent Hill 2 are important because they demonstrate what letting people do things their way can do to someone. It destroys them, day by day, and leads to psychosis and delusion. We see it all the time in every part of the world. Someone who's mentally ill doesn't get the proper intervention or help, they do something desperate or get dangerous, and people who knew them never seem to do a damn thing to stop them, and there's always about 50 different red flags that seem to go unnoticed. I'm not saying we should all live in some police state where writing edgy poetry is punishable by a week-long isolation in a mental ward, nah. But there has to be a point where people can get help properly through a legal, humane, and tax-funded program. It would make use of all those useless degrees my generation seems to possess, and it would drastically reduce things like mass shootings, suicide, self-harm, existential breakdowns, and health issues from stress and fatigue. I mean, I believe in individuality, self-expression, and freedom of choice, but there comes a point where people genuinely need help. And it shouldn't be a volunteer-based thing, especially if you have some kid who's drawing the words, I want to die, over and over on his notebook and not talking to anybody, or you have some guy who writes rape fantasies about women he sees in the gym and then posts them to his TikTok, never blinking or emoting while he reads them. Those people need help. They don't just deserve help, they need help, forcibly and quickly to prevent damage or a loss of life. Also, something I wish socially everybody could understand is some people, they can't be helped. I've seen it too often in my own life, and you know, it's just a sad, cruel part of the world. Even with all my wishful thinking of forced help to the mentally ill, it doesn't stop abuse. It doesn't stop suicide or homelessness or violence. It's just, unfortunately, inevitable. Some pain is beyond repair, and that can break people. I mean, it almost happened to me, and it took a lot of effort to steer myself in the right direction. And I've known people who've killed themselves, or became addicts, or homeless, or abused their kids, and it breaks my heart, especially if I'd known them since school. I still, to this very day, struggle to think that the last physical conversations I had with one of my best friends was negative before he dropped out. We talked online after high school, and it was all positive, but he died in a military accident before he was even 20, and I feel like his life was cut so short, and he didn't deserve the fucking life he was given before because he barely had time to live. And I still feel like I could have reached out even more in high school just to keep him from dropping out and to avoid him from joining the military, but I did everything I could, and I can't change that. I know my final conversation with him online was good, and his choices were his own in life, and it wasn't my place to tell him what he should do with his future. I think of a friend I had in high school who I told the reality of his plan to somehow just move to Japan and become a manga artist with zero money and experience. And he had a total breakdown after that, and I feel like it was my fault. Like, if I had taken back that reality check that I thought was an act of trying to make him see reason, he'd get a grip. Maybe we'd still be friends, but I don't know. I know I did everything I could, and his descent further into nihilism and self-destruction was far from my fault, and was building up for years before we even met. There really is an aspect of Silent Hill 2's story concerning James that resonates with people like me and many others who've experienced guilt from their actions, whether they be extreme or minor, and I've really not seen any other game or media since paint that picture so clearly. The last half hour or so of SH2 was such an emotional roller coaster because everything up to that point has been hinting, prodding, and trying to show the player what James has done, and also beautifully integrates the player-to-player character relationship for the big ultimate conclusions. You really feel like you went on James's journey through the hell of his mind and the hell of the town itself. You really feel like your preconceived thoughts on James can be shaped by his revelations as they happen to him as well. You really feel like you earned the ending you worked towards just as much as James did. I really haven't played many games that can make me feel towards a little pile of pixels because of how real and mature the story is. We see it in games and film all the time that characters are meant to either be likable or unlikable, based on the way they're written and directed, but in my mind as a writer, a good character is one who feels like they can be interpreted in different lights by different types of people. I can't stand this current trend of making a sympathetic villain who somehow has to be saved or relatable. Real life isn't like that. People can change, yeah, but someone like James would be considered a villain in the eyes of the law, and the general public. The fact I feel actually bad for him because he was pushed too far for too long, and I can empathize with him in a way that wasn't forced on me through a monologue of awkward exposition, that's what good writing is. Subtlety and just the right amount of vagueness for enough room for interpretation can create a truly timeless character because it makes them feel that much more real. Like, the only characters I can think of off the top of my head writing this that even come close to that level of interpretation are characters like Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver, Joshua Graham from New Vegas, or Walter White from Breaking Bad. All of these characters have committed or planned horrible acts, but their raw and primal instincts of survival, extremity through circumstance, and want for some real sense of redemption have a long-lasting impression on me as a viewer, and many others as well, because of how well they're handled. Someone like Darth Vader is a poor villain in my eyes because of how overly complex and unreal his struggles are. He literally was a cocky, arrogant asshole from the start of the prequels, and his quest for redemption is so convoluted and fleshed out through supplementary materials that by the time he kills the Emperor, it's like, okay, somehow that one act makes all the bad he did okay? Order and balance of the Force my ass, all he did was create a power vacuum. Someone like Anton Chigurh is somewhat of an unreal villain to me, and I like No Country for Old Men, and the cinematography is pretty good, and the undertones of the world moving on from the hero sheriff days is pretty cool, but I feel that he's almost too capable and unstoppable, like a horror film monster, more than just a man on a mission. Don't give me that Scar is the greatest, bestest villain ever bullshit either, because that's reaching for straws in a fucking drawer full of razor blades, man, and when you're ready to act like a grown-up, you better bring something more realistic than the Mean Brown Lion to discuss on morality, philosophy, and character analysis. But all mean jabs aside, I think that's as much as I really want to talk about Silent Hill 2 for, like, ever. And maybe you can see what I mean after all this. Silent Hill 2 isn't what I used to process all these emotions and experiences in my life, but it allowed me the ability to know how to reflect on what I was taught in my years of therapy and healing. It was something I kept close in my heart when I first saw it when I was very young, because I knew it meant something special to me in that moment, and maybe even for the future. Very few games will ever compare. I'm sorry, it's unfair to say, but it's true. Because, you know, as edgy as it sounds, in filth, it will be found. And I hope, I really do, someday, we can all see what that truly means. Thanks for watching.